Jefferson climbs the ladder. Oh my goodness!
It's Sunday. It's 1:00 p.m. That means we're talking NASCAR. Coop and myself back from Pure Sports, talking the Verizon 200 at the Brickyard. Interesting little speedway in Indianapolis. Coop, before we go into that, last week, Chris Buescher really decided to stick it up my ass. I had no ownership of him. Goes back to back. When was the last time that happened for a driver that's maybe not in that top tier that they go back to back on tracks, winning?
Rare.
Right.
Rare.
And he didn't. And it wasn't even like I know the week before it set up nicely for him. Last week it really didn't.
Yeah.
And look, kudos to him. Didn't help me much. I can promise you that. But on your end, how'd you guys do? Were you guys able to fire somewhat back on him or do anything in capacity on the DFS side?
No, I had no Buescher whatsoever in DFS, so I lost everything I put into it. But fortunately, I was able to grab him at 1,800 live to bet, so that was a nice little hedge piece there. But yeah, DFS was not good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it happens. I think that some weeks we talk on, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and sometimes you kind of get screwed on your plays you go heavier on or plays that you fade, especially with a sport with the amount of variance NASCAR has. Sometimes you're in a spot where it's like, okay, I made the right decisions today. Now I just kind of need this race to continue how it's been going, and then something might happen to stop that. But I don't think there was any scenario last week where it made any feasible sense to play Chris Buescher. Do you remember
he was starting number 4, and if he'd never led any laps and still finished in the top 5, he probably wasn't that great of a play. But
that's what I mean.
With him leading that many laps, and then obviously winning, he ended up becoming a great play. No, I would imagine he was single digits or close to, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, pretty insane on that front. And the big thing with last week, if you remember, Coop, was that most weeks, and this happened again this week, most weeks you get elite drivers that start from the back every week, like a few of them, whether it's, from 25 back or from 22 back, whatever it is, you usually get elite drivers that start from the back for random reasons. Last week, that wasn't the case.
Shitload of them this week.
Yeah, and this week, buckle the fuck up because there's quite a lot starting from the back. But you're on a track that it's going to be tough to pass, right? So, with that said, for this week, why don't you talk through a little bit of the track, a little bit of maybe things you might expect or not expect, and obviously this is a road course, so it's going to feel a little different for the drivers. Hadn't had a road course in, I believe, maybe 6 to 7 weeks. Coop, correct me if I'm wrong. So
yeah, unless you count Chicago, I mean,
fair.
It's a street course, but same package of what they're using today. But other than that, the last one was Sonoma over the summer.
Yeah, so it's been quite some time. And Coop, before you go into your breakdown of the track, I just want to mention the fact that if you're not a member at runpuresports.com, that's fine. We don't dislike you, LOL. But seriously, if you're not a member of Run Pure Sports, you can go over to runpuresports.com, and Jason Hamlet writes a great article every week. It's free. It's kind of like his cheat sheet for how the race is going to go. Breaks down a little history of it. It gives out some plays that he likes. And it talks history on the track as well, breaks down various components of the racers that he likes, from racers that he doesn't like. And again, totally free. Head over to runpuresports.com. Feel free to read that article. It's always very informative. As for this show, we will be running through Coop's playbook, which gets a little more intricate or a little more into the weeds, if you will, with player write-ups and breakdowns and who makes sense to play, who makes sense to fade. And it's a top to bottom list, including nearly all drivers in the field, where it's a little different than Jason's article, where Jason's article is a little more concentrated. Coop kind of goes through the entire piece. That's what we go through on this show. So if you are a member, you do get that entire playbook. You do get the core plays. You get the whole arsenal for how to build lineups in this sport. Whether you enjoy this sport, whether you don't, you can definitely make money just following through Coop's playbook. So, Coop, without further ado, we'll go and talk on who you like from a Dominator perspective, even though this race likely isn't going to warrant a whole lot of Dominator action. Place differential, which will be a big one, middle tier folks, your value drivers, and of course, who you're fading. But in relation to this track, just briefly talk a little on it, some things that could be noted to be different, and maybe some guys to keep in mind before we talk on your playbook?
So this is the third edition of this particular race, and it's going to be far different than the prior two. The prior two were absolute shit shows because turn number one, they come off of a long straightaway, and the restart zone was right before the start-finish line. And, they were very tight, bunched up. You saw a lot of cars do dive bombs, and it ended up, taking each other out. And you saw 3, 4, 5 car, incidents, spins, so on and so forth. People getting pushed into the grass, that type of stuff. And, it really led to a lot of drivers, starting in the back, moving up front that you wouldn't expect. Drivers who were good got caught up into it, ended up bad, et cetera, et cetera. So this year they've redone the start zone, and it's back before the straightaway begins. And it's actually coming off of not one turn, but 2 turns. And if you watched the Xfinity race yesterday, it really separated the field. And it's good for, eliminating the potential of, a shit show and having multiple cars, run into each other. But I think it's bad from the perspective that it spreads out the field quite a bit. And it makes it very difficult and more challenging for the cars starting, back to, come up front and gain positions. And, if you're looking to win, like if you're not in the top probably 2 rows, you're probably SOL when it comes down to it at the end if there's a restart. So, you've got that going from this race. Then, like you said, Dominators really isn't the key today. It's only 82 laps. But those Dom points, even though they're few and not many, they are extremely important, especially for the drivers priced, close to 10K and over 10K, because they're going to need those Dominator points to pay off their salary in most instances. And when you have a driver up front or 2 that are going to be very good, because usually what we see in this race is there's 2 or 3 cars who are exceptionally better than the field. And usually you get those 2 or 3 cars, they're within 1, 2, 3 seconds of each other. And then like 4th, 5th, 6th, they can be anywhere from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 seconds behind. So, winning is very difficult, and it's all about track position. Throw on top of that, it's all about strategy in this race too. A lot of times this race is run backwards, meaning, they need to pit twice at some point during this race. When they pit those 2 times is going to be, the make or break decision for these drivers and how they finish.
I think what you often see with these road tracks is that difference of strategies, right? Because if you start getting a few extra cautions, you typically get a whole lot of cautions on these tracks. They also give a lot of wiggle room there because typically it's a little more spaced out, as you know. But it does create a bit of an interesting dynamic in terms of hoping you pick the guys that use a strategy that makes the most sense to win. I think, but with that said, sometimes people overuse a strategy to win, and it forces them to come up short towards the end. So we'll see how it plays out. But we see it every time on these tracks where people take different strategies. And I'm sure it's more of a math versus science type of thing where I'm sure these crews are like, hey, look, if we get 4 cautions as an example, we may be able to get away with only pitting, in the middle of stage 2 as an example, or maybe we can get away holding off on an extra pit until later in the race, or maybe use a pit earlier in the race. So many different strategies you can approach, anticipating potentially more cautions than not. And that's where it kind of gets tilting because you watch a race and you're like, what the hell are we doing right now? Why are we pitting right now? Like randomly. And it definitely can tilt you as you're watching the race.
Yeah, I think from a caution perspective, like it's going to be tough to have them. And I think we'll see them either really early in the race or really late in the race. I think if they get through the first several laps without a caution, we could see it go, green for quite some time. Because like you said, if you spin out, you're just going to have to get going back and go. So, things that would bring out a caution would be, debris on the track from a accident, or a car, getting stuck in the gravel, a car, that just can't restart, things of that nature. So, it's tough. And that yellow flag is going to be extremely, extremely important today in a DFS perspective.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'll have 2 points for you. One will be a question from Joe. So, Joe, if I'm playing cash for the first time, I'm a member, so I'll look at the cash core, but main strategy, place differential drivers mainly. So, I'll briefly answer that, Coop, and I'll let you build on it. So, for this track in particular, I mean, for most, here's the thing, Joe, I'm not sure if you play, I know you're saying you're playing cash for the first time. I'm not sure if you often play NASCAR and, today you're only playing cash, or maybe it's the first time you're really dabbling in NASCAR waters. If you play cash, most of your lineup should be place differential, especially for a track like this, because you obviously have the best upside with guys like that. But also keep in mind, if you're playing cash and you're playing heavy place differential, your lineups are going to look very similar to your opponents, because most of the folks play it in that fashion. Like if you're going to play in cash games, most of the people have the same strategy of, I'll take a few extra place differential guys to have a better, safer projection, if you will. So yeah, short answer, you want to go heavier place differential there, but as you get deeper, you're going to realize that your lineups are very similar. And maybe in your cash game lineups, like you're going to find you're going to have a bunch of 1v1s or 2v2s. That's really going to decide your day on most Sundays. Coop, anything you want to add there?
No, if I'm playing cash today, I'm either playing 5 place differential drivers or 6. The question is, do you want to take a shot on Tyler Reddick or not? Like, I don't think you can play anybody else up top other than Tyler Reddick. Because one, if you don't play him, I think he's going to be popular enough to where he can sink your lineup if he does very good. But 2, if you do play him and he doesn't do well, I think you still have enough, to fall back on and be able to cash. So he would be the only one I would consider up top.
Yeah, and 10-3 is not a cheap tag by any means. We'll talk on a few of the dominators. A question I had for you before we go into this slate, as we have a nice little fun new name into the streets. Not new for any folks that follow just racing in general, but Shane Van Gisbergen, good odds to win, a pretty prestigious route to get here. Do you think, as I look at some of these odds with him, I mean, as low as 9-1 at some books to win this race? He had just raced in an oval, I think, for the first time 3 days ago, something like that. At least let me be more clear, in the NASCAR ovals a few days ago. Coop, what are we doing with this guy? Obviously a new name, maybe to few looking at the lineups, and obviously he's a decent favorite especially for a guy making his debut on a main track. Well, what says you about him in general?
Everything worked out perfectly for the kid, or the guy and a kid, when we were at Chicago. It was phenomenal for him. And, to have that happen again, it's going to take quite a bit. So I know there's a lot of people on him. I sent a text to or DM to Jay with MGM's breakdown earlier in the week, and he had a enormous amount of handle on him, the most by far. It was ridiculous. It was like over 22-23%. And, that's tough, to play. And I think for me, the biggest thing is his price, versus his starting position. So, I hope other people jump on him. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes, 3rd, 4th, 5th, where he starts, has a good run. I just don't see the upside in DFS.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure he's got a decent amount of pressure on him. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be about 15-16% owned. A bit of a wild card for sure. But interesting to see how it plays out. But let's thanks for that breakdown there. Let's talk on your dominators. So obviously you had already said that, it's going to be a heavy place differential day for you, especially in cash. But from a dominator perspective, who obviously, I'm sure you'll talk a little more on Reddick as you just did previously, but who is even worthwhile here? Because you really can't have two guys up here. I guess in theory we could talk on Alex Bowman because he's cheap in theory, but they're not going to get enough points to get you there. So what are you doing with your dominators and who makes sense to play and who makes sense to fade?
So from a lineup construction perspective, I can't start two drivers starting in the top four. It would have to play out, perfectly for that to hit. And I think it's even harder today just because of all the drivers starting 16th and beyond who have that upside. And to not see at least three of those drivers hit, is going to be tough. So I'm out on that. From a lineup perspective, I'll have a couple with, somebody in the top and then maybe somebody starting 5th through 10th. But again, it's going to be tough for, those drivers starting in that range to be, optimal too, again, because of all the drivers, starting later who have that upside. So for me today, it's really Tyler Reddick. The guy's been phenomenal here recently from a speed perspective. It's been himself making mistakes and or his pit crew mostly killing him. But one thing that has been consistent has been the speed of that car. And if you look at his road course stats, they've been extremely consistent too since last year. Throw out Sonoma, where he has struggled both years, and he's been extremely, extremely dominant. So I think he's the driver up front who has the upside to get a lot of those dom points to be able to compete with the place differential drivers. You have Chase Elliott up there too. I think you got to look at him. He's going to, do some strategy. He's going to try to get to the lead, but I just think he was a little bit slower than Reddick, and I don't think he's going to be able to pass him. So I'm going to pass on him. Early on, I was considering Suarez, McDowell, and Gibbs, but I'm passing on the three of them. The price on Gibbs, the price on McDowell is very good. And Suarez starting up front, he could lead a first bit of those laps. But I think ultimately the three of them are going to hurt their upside because they're going to be fighting for stage points, in my opinion. They're going to take the route that allows them to earn the most stage points. And the reason being is because they're fighting for the playoffs. Gibbs is the 16th place driver. He's 3 points up on McDowell, 5 points up on Suarez. And I think, if one of them goes off and doesn't go for the stage points, the other two definitely are. But I don't see a scenario where they get off and they don't fight for those stage points because they're guaranteed stage points. They're guaranteed points. And, they're going to help in the end because if they finish 17th through 20th and they get anywhere from, let's say, 16 to 20 stage points between the two stages, even 15, they can end up scoring more points than what they would with a second or third place finish without those stage points. So, I'm off of them. In the best case scenario for them, they pit right after the stages and, they only lose a position here or a position there. But I just don't see the upside for them. Last week we saw Bubba Wallace have a top 5 car, and he gave up basically a chance to win the race to garner stage points. So I don't see it being any different this week. Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson, Chris Bell, I'm just going to take a chance and fade on them. I could see why you would want to play all three of them. They could be good, but I don't know if they're good enough to beat Reddick. And if they don't have those dominator points, I don't think, they end up paying off whatsoever.
And interestingly enough, too, Coop, Chris Buescher, he's not bad on these tracks.
He's really good.
I do remember when I cashed out that 100K last year, he was in that lineup, I believe. Him and Keselowski and Ryan Blaney and Suarez. He does race, decent on these tracks. Be interesting if he went for a three-peat. And he's going to be popular today, though. He wasn't popular, but he'll be popular today.
Yeah.
All right. So glad we got through the Dominator piece, because to me, it's the least important part of this track in particular. And I think you'd agree there, Coop. But I think people still need perspective there, because you're likely going to need one of those. It's likely that one of these guys ends up in the optimal, one of the potential Dominators. But more likely that we get a bunch more place differential guys. So, Coop, let's slide over to that category. There are some chalk folks in this range today. Well, here's this. Walk through the list, but start with Harvick and Byron, because they're both from the back. They're both priced practically free as far as what their win equity is versus their price. The cool kids call these free squares. So what are we doing with Harvick? What are we doing with Byron? And then talk on some of the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't think either one of them's free today, because they both come with a lot of risk. With that said, though, I'm going to be all in on Byron. So Willie B, had some issues in inspection yesterday. Failed 3 times. He was allowed to practice, but he wasn't able to qualify. On top of that, he has to serve a pass-through penalty at the beginning of the race. I don't know if you watched the race yesterday, but when these cars were coming off a pit road, they looked like they were moving like a freaking snail compared to the cars going on, the straightaway. So he's going to serve that penalty, and he's going to be probably, 15 to 20 to 25 seconds behind the closest car in front of him, let alone he's probably going to be 70 to 80 seconds behind the leader. And if we don't see any cautions, he's not going to gain very many spots, because he's just going to be so far behind. And if the caution comes out early for him, man, he's sitting in a great spot. If it comes out mid-race, he's sitting in an okay spot because he can still gain some, positions. If it comes out late, man, he's screwed. So I'm going to take my chances, and that caution is going to come out earlier than later, and I'm going to go all in on him because I think, he's going to come in owned, but not as owned as what he possibly could be. So with that said, though, I don't see him. He has to get 18th to make his value. With that said, I don't think, he's got a top 10 car because it's just so many positions he would have to pass. But he could definitely get up into that top 18. And I think the other thing, going for him is he can play the strategy game and take some chances and pit off cycle versus these guys. And, hope that as soon as he pits, a caution comes out and he gains a bunch of track position.
And question for you, Coop, and I apologize for cutting you off. Just to be clear, you're talking Byron with this specifically, right? You don't think
William Byron. Yeah.
So what about Harvick, who's a lot cheaper, who won't need to finish in the top 10? Right. What are you doing with Harvick?
I'll have a little bit of them, but not an over exuberant amount of them, because one, he's not very good on road courses minus Sonoma. Two, he's fighting a little injury himself, so he's probably not going to be as comfortable in the car as he normally would. And three, I think a top 25 is great for him. If he got inside the top 20 somehow, that would be exceptional. But it wouldn't surprise me if he finished 25th through 28th. Like I said, these cars, it's not going to be a mile and a half to where these cars can just zoom right up through the field. They're going to have to be slow, and they're going to have to be methodical, and it's going to take them, a good amount of time to, gain 10, 12, 15 positions. And, the thing too is if somehow they get caught up in an accident and spin out and they got to restart again, it's just going to be double for them. And more likely when we see, issues in this race, it comes from the mid to the back of the field.
Got it. And who's some other drivers that you might like? Obviously, I wanted to touch on those two because if you look at projections, like those two are going to be the highest owned drivers on the slate. So,
definitely. AJ Allmendinger and Denny Hamlin are both interesting plays. Neither one of them are very happy with their cars whatsoever. So, they have great upside. But I could see one of them doing well and the other not. I also see a scenario where neither one of them does well. Denny's been mixed on this track. He could have won the race or should have won the race 2 years ago. Last year, he looked like he'd never driven a car before in his life. He was so bad. There's that with him. And, the other thing is, like, he came out at Sonoma and he was extremely fast. He said he was running a Tyler Reddick package. And then he went to the Chicago street race and pulled on sat on the pole. Then the rain came and he got scared, so never really knew what's going to happen there. But it was really, really disappointing and surprising how slow he was yesterday, based upon what we had seen here recently from him in this package on the road courses. And Dinger, my thing with Dinger is, like, he's exceptional on road courses in Xfinity. But if you look at his Cup results, they haven't been that great. And, like, I kind of think of Dinger, like, he just abuses the shit out of the car because he's so aggressive with it. And I think in the end, it hurts them. I like to look at it like when you think of managing tires, you think of Kevin Harvick, you think of Martin Truex and how they do a good job of not destroying their tires. And, when they need to have them on the tracks that eat them up, they do well and manage them. Like, AJ Allmendinger needs to figure out how to do that on a road course to where he just doesn't kill his car because he's killed his car quite often, quite a bit. There's two more guys in here, Cindric and Chastain. I think, they're going to be lower owned than all four of the drivers we had spoken about. They haven't had great seasons compared to what the expectations were. But on the other stick, both of them are very good on the road courses. Cindric, especially, has been, consistent and able to find in the top 10. He hasn't done well this year, but, you can't count him out. And the same with Chastain. You just never know if the speed's going to be there or not. And then the last driver back there is Kobayashi. He's a ringer, driving a Toyota 23XI car. So he should have good equipment. The guy was, talked up quite a bit during the week, as being a phenomenal driver who always has speed. There were rumors out there that when you look at the sim and you compare it to the rest of the Toyotas, he was the best. But, it didn't come out that way for him. So I do think as the race goes on and he gets more adjusted to what's going on, I think it's going to help him out a lot. And I also think that what helps him too is it being spread out more. Whereas, like, if it wasn't spread out and they were tight and close to each other, he's not used to that beating and banging. So it being spread out more, I think, is a big, help for him too. I think I'll definitely have some shots on him.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? As you kind of look through projections as a whole, and by the way, Coop, great info all around on this, to me, the most important topic of this track. It's just a matter of kind of figuring out what makes sense from a place differential perspective on where these guys can land, and make sure you match that with your projections. Obviously, you can use the custom the stock. Go
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying, obviously, you can use like the stock projections from whether it's Sabre or Cruncher or wherever you're getting your optos from. But if you look at some of these prices, like, to me, like, I'd want to fade Harvick because I think he's like a good fade overall. But then, like, you look at what he really needs at 7,300. It could, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like 17th, 18th.
But like Kobayashi's a great pivot off of Harvick. He's going to see a lot less ownership. So they're similarly priced. He's got to get a little bit farther ahead. But again, like, these guys have so much point upside for them. Like, it's hard to see two of them not be able to hit. And I know a lot of times we talk about, you got to hit 5 times the value. Like, I don't think you necessarily have to look at it like that this race. Like, you're just looking to see who you can accomplish to get the most points in your lineup. And that's what it comes down to. Because it wouldn't surprise me if there's a driver in the lineup, maybe even 2, that doesn't hit 5 times, what their price is. But, if Kobayashi outscores Harvick or, comes really close to him, you're going to be, sitting very well. So, but I'll have at least 2 of these guys in all my lineups.
Here's what I think makes sense, Coop, and I'm interested in your thoughts. Byron, Harvick, Allmendinger, Kobayashi, and Hamlin, which are going to be the 5 most popular, likely the 5 most popular drivers on the slate in different order in terms of ownership or whatnot percentages, but these are likely going to be the 5 most popular drivers on the slate. You likely won't see any other driver that's more than 25, 26% owned than the 5 I just mentioned. What's your thoughts there, Coop, in terms of an ability to be different where you take those 5 drivers, and don't get me wrong, there's other place differential drivers you can go with. These are just the chalk. What if you did something where, and here's the thing, all 5 of them I would consider to be good chalk. Argument could be made that they're good chalk. All 5. You could say that they're maybe not elite, but at minimum, each in their own way could be considered good chalk. What do you think about a rule with them 5 that you say max 2 of them 5?
Byron, Harvick, Dinger, Hamlin, and Kobayashi.
Yeah, maximum of those 5, maximum 2. In every lineup, minimum of 2, maximum of 2. So we'll say no matter what, every one of your lineups has to have 2 of the 5 drivers, no more, no less, 100% of your lineups.
I would do it with like 75% of my lineups.
Now, let me ask you this. Would you only do it 75% because you're afraid that 3 of them might get in, or you're afraid that 2 of them might not get in?
I'm afraid, well, you could look at it both ways, to be quite honest with you. I think with that final 25%, I would have 3 of them split, and then I would only have 1 of them.
I see. Because I look at it like the track like this is interesting, right? Because you have in these races, you often get what could be obvious chalk, right? Then there's good chalk, then there's great chalk. I would argue all 5 of them are relatively good chalk, but we just know it's not going to end up with 4 of these guys in the optimal. I mean, it's just
exactly. That's why I'm kind of leaning towards no more than 2, because like Cindric and Chastain could easily put all 4 of them to sleep. If they get into the top 10, which they very well could have. And then there's 3 other drivers we haven't talked about yet who are, good pivots off of them too, who could easily beat them too.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I do personally like that rule though, and I'm going to use it. Max 2 of those drivers. Again, it's risky, so I wouldn't, not for the faint of heart. But because here's the thing, if 3 of them nuke, you're definitely not in optimals. If only 1 of them nukes, you're definitely not in optimals. But if 2 of them, whichever 2 it is, happen to find their way in an optimal, you're going to have a handful of lineups that have just those 2 and none of the other, chalk that missed the optimal.
So let's come back to that in a couple minutes.
Okay. All right, let's do it.
So we'll move on to the next section, cool. Our favorite section.
Yeah. Well, quick shout to the chat, Gavin. I'm sorry I didn't even acknowledge you. Always love you, Gavin.
He's used to it though.
Yeah, I mean, Gavin, us ignoring you, this wouldn't be a normal show if we weren't ignoring you. But it's always love. And our guy Jake pops in after baseball, gets his lineups done and pops in. Always love you as well, Jake. True OG. Jake likes Bouchard today as well, which again, I can't argue it. I definitely can't argue it. And Keselowski, he's saying the RFK showing speed, so don't argue that. And then Jason being a master of managing tires, especially on road courses. I do consider myself a bit of a savant in relation to being able to manage my tires. It's all about pace. It's more on the science end of things, Jason, but I might write a book at some point about it. And hopefully one day, Coop, if I do, you'll read it on how to manage your own tires in more efficient manners.
Definitely.
I love that this is the kind of like random ignoring. It's kind of what makes the show great. All right, so Koopa, let's slide over to the next section, middle tier drivers. Our guy, we'll get to hear Chris Buescher's name in here. A fan favorite name will also get mentioned in here, who often gets mentioned on the show every week. Coop, walk us through this tier where arguably you probably, if you're arguing to yourself that you need 5 place differential drivers, you don't want to play a dominator, this is going to be your 6th position. So Who do you like here?
Well, obviously Chris Buescher. He's a top 10 king on these road courses in this new car. So, I would not be surprised if Buescher is more popular than some of the drivers that we had just finished talking about. The one thing that could keep people away from Chris Buescher is the price. Paying $9,100, $9,200 for Chris Buescher, I think that's probably an all-time high price for him. And it's probably a good 1,000 to, if not more, expensive than what people are used to paying for him. So that's the only thing I think that could keep his ownership down from competing with the guys we just previously talked about. Then you have Logano and Blaney. They're just sitting there. And I don't think hardly anybody's going to play them whatsoever. All right. They're great pivots to have off of, the guys that we just talked about, and they're a great pivot off of Buescher. They're not exceptional when it comes to road courses, but Blaney is better on the Rovals, and a Roval is part, road course, part, super speedway, and than what he is on the true road courses. So he has that going for him. And then Joey Logano, his crew chief is exceptional when it comes to playing the strategy game. And how often is it we just see Joey Logano finish out of the blue? Oh, shit, here comes Joey Logano. He's going to have a fifth place finish today. His car's been cracked the whole day, and he gets that great finish. So, you definitely got to consider the two of them. What do you think about a rule? You have the three of them, and you didn't mention Chastain, you didn't mention Cindric in the other rule, all right, of having at least one of them in every lineup or two of them in every lineup.
Which three drivers specifically, just so I'm clear, Cooper, you're referencing in that rule?
Well, it'd be five. It'd be Chastain, Cindric, Buescher, Logano, and Blaney. Chastain. If we're playing a 5 versus 5 game, those 5 drivers versus Dinger, Hamlin, Byron, Kobayashi, and Harvick, I'm taking the other group. Just pure. But then when you think about it,
that fifth.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that fifth driver, just so I have them clear on the 5 drivers. You had Cindric, Logano, Blaney, Chastain, Buescher. Was that the 5?
Cindric, Logano, Chastain, Blaney, Buescher. Yeah.
Okay.
I would take those 5 drivers right there, finishing better than the other 5 drivers in the group that's farther behind.
You could definitely make an argument that, use at least one and no more than 2.
Right. And I wouldn't be afraid to play 3 of them in one lineup and only have one from the other group of 5. Because it wouldn't surprise me if only one of Harvick, Kobayashi, Byron, Hamlin, and Dinger pay off.
And that's fair. And look, these guys are all affordable, right? It's not like they're not affordable.
Right. So, or if you want to, you can put all 10 of those guys in your driver pool. And you can just say, hey, make my lineups from here and then hope that a Tyler Reddick doesn't get a bunch of Dominator points and screw you.
Fair. But look, I think these guys are what would be considered moderate chalk, right? So you don't want to load your lineup up with them.
They're going to be in the teens.
Yeah, I do think as you're navigating and trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't, I think you're kind of, yes, you're using an optimizer, but in reality, you're really building the lineup yourself. So I actually like that idea in terms of going heavier on the 2 chalk guys and then going a little heavy on this middle tier, not all in, not like you're going on that first tier where it's got to be 2 specifically, because again, you're using the optimizer, but in reality, you're kind of telling the optimizer exactly the type of lineups to build, which is again, what you really need to do. The more you control the optimizer, the better, your own metrics will result in, especially with your own takes. So no, I like that idea. That's why I think
one thing that you could do is just say, all right, I'm going to lock William Byron in. and I'm going to hope that he gets that caution. And because if he does, and he's able to get up to like 15th, 16th, 14th place, like he's going to have a huge day from a point perspective. And he could be your one guy out of those. And then you just play him with the other 5 guys of Logano, Blaney, Chastain, Cindric, and Busher.
You know, I like that rule with them. So consider me a fan of that.
But yeah, rules are going to be more like usually like you see rules a lot more on like when you're at Daytona or Talladega, even Atlanta. But you don't see them that often in these other races, but I think today they are, important. And then like the other thing that's great about this slate is like you can go so many different ways. Like I think you're going to see, a lot of times you see duplicate lineups and NASCAR do very well. I think there's a good chance today that you see less than what you normally would.
It makes sense, right? I think that there's a lot of added variance into, kind of what this might become today. So no, I don't. I think you have so many different options as far as pivots and whatnot that no, I mean, consider me a fan of some of this stuff. I think that just trying to tweak your lineup as best you can, because if you can figure out the chalk parts of your lineup and then just let the optimizer do the rest, it might be ideal. And Jason said he was going to go 2 from each of those groups. Don't mind that at all. It's just to be clear, Jason, if you're using an optimizer with that in mind, that is a very concentrated build. Whereas if you don't you give yourself a little bit of leeway where, granted, if you get that right, I mean, you're going to be golden, but there is a lot of ways that can go wrong. And then you're basically drawn dead in terms of even getting money back. You're probably drawn dead. So just something to keep in consideration in terms of your risk aversion there, Jason. But if you're good with that risk, I mean, yeah, definitely. No issues
like
there.
I think like if you're doing that, like I want to be careful and go back and review the lineups because like I don't want a lot of those lineups to have 2 of Busher and Logano or Blaney. Maybe just one of them. And I want even fewer lineups to have both Logano and Blaney in them because the chances of both of them, hitting and doing well aren't as good as just obviously one of them.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. All right, so I'm just trying to modify some of my own projections. All right, let's move over. Jake wants your opinion on Bell, Busher, Dinger, or Hamlin. Who do you like the best?
Bell, Busher, Dinger, Hamlin. I think Chris Bell has the most upside when it comes to finishing position, but from a DFS perspective, I think Busher has the most upside.
Interesting. And Hamlin's in an interesting spot, right? Because he's basically positioned right with Allmendinger, and he's just not getting like nearly as much love as Allmendinger is getting today. Despite Hamlin being cheaper, I'd argue Allmendinger's price is around as high as we'll normally see about on these tracks at the NASCAR level, obviously not the Xfinity. But Hamlin, I'd argue, is relatively cheap for where he's coming from. And it does look like, and even when you look at the win equity, like Hamlin's 40, Allmendinger, so Allmendinger's a good chunk different in terms of win equity. So, okay, so now it makes sense.
The pricing is almost like super speedway type of pricing that you see this week because Logano's 7,900, Blaney's 7,700, Harvick's 7,300. Like you can leave as much salary on your lineup as you possibly want to. Just make sure that it has upside within it. Don't leave salary to try to get sneaky. I would try to leave salary to try to be different.
Yeah, I think that overall, I think that makes a ton of sense for various reasons, right? Let's move over to value. There are some interesting drivers in this range, Coop, cheap drivers that might not feel great about, but you definitely don't feel terrible about, all things considered. So I do see a few of these names which make sense on this list, Coop. Walk me through who you really like, and then walk me through maybe who is passable type chalk or passable.
Yeah, this is an interesting range here too because one, you don't have to play any of these drivers if you don't want to. All right. Most of the lineups are going to have one. And I think if you want to get really different, throw 2 of these drivers in your lineup because that's going to make you different. So Gilliland's my favorite because I think out of all these drivers, He's starting farther forward than Jensen Button, which I like. He's a little bit cheaper also. I just think he has more finishing position upside. Button I like too. We've seen him, finish in the top 20 here before too, on these road courses. So, I think he's a nice pivot off of, some of these cheaper or more expensive drivers, in the place differential section, like a Denny Hamlin or an AJ Allmendinger. Wouldn't surprise me if he finishes in front of both of them, especially if their cars aren't as good as what they say they are. Justin Haley's just a low-owned dart. Nobody's going to play the guy starting 15th. He's going to have a hard time getting there because all of these guys would have to struggle in order for him to become optimal. But he's going to make your lineups different. Austin Dillon I like as a pivot in the new car on road courses. He's been much better than what he was in the old car and road courses where he was absolutely horrible. I don't think very many people are going to play him because of Ricky Stenhouse, who's cheaper and starting farther back. He's going to get a little bit more, ownership. But again, Stenhouse, nice pivot off of Denny Hamlin, nice pivot off of AJ Allmendinger. From a, just looking at total points perspective, because it wouldn't surprise me if they finished in front of them. Eric Jones, people love Eric Jones. Like, you never know what week he's going to show up. His car was absolutely horrible in practice, like really, really bad. So, I have a couple lineups, but not many with Eric Jones. And then two drivers that are risky. And they could do well, but still end up on the short end of the stick because of all the other drivers that have the potential to outscore them, is Chase Briscoe and Alex Bowman. I could see both of them finishing in the 6th, 7th, 8th place, but then not working out for you because, they just didn't get the other points that some of these other drivers got.
Yeah, there is a lot here, right? And as almost crazy as it sounds, Todd Gilliland's going to be popular. He obviously you talked to him briefly as well, Coop. 5,900 coming from 23rd. He's got win equity, I believe, in the 80 to 1 neighborhood, 100 to 1 neighborhood, I guess, depending on your book.
He's teammate with Michael McDowell too, which is very popular.
Yeah, so
and a good car.
You just look at some of these guys, even like McDowell, right? Starting from 4th. Like McDowell to me is kind of hard to love, but he's 14 to 1 to win this race and he's cheap. Like you don't need him to do much from here. Like if he finishes in 4th, Coop, that gives him what? Almost 40. And God forbid he leads a few laps.
Yep.
I mean, he's going to get there, right? If he just finishes where he's starting. And I'm just trying to see what his equity is to finish in the top 10.
He's a minus number.
Pull this up. Yeah, I mean, he's minus 150 to finish inside the top 10. And he's only plus 175 to finish in the T5. I'd argue, Coop, just based on value, if he finishes in 5th, he likely has a good shot at the optimal, unless place differential completely nukes the slate, which it could. McDowell's an interesting spot, obviously, because he doesn't fit the place differential box. But he's starting up in a track that's going to be tough to pass, and he's going to be tough to pass himself. McDowell
he's starting 4th. Like, how far if he finishes 5th, do you think he's optimal?
So I was just saying, I think that
how far down the board can he go before he's not optimal? I mean, I know a lot of it depends upon everybody else's results, but
I think push comes to shove. I think as long as the people around him, place differential wise, don't completely nuke multiple of them, I don't think it's crazy that McDowell could finish in 6th and still get in the optimal. It would get him like a 39, would get him like a 38, I think, or a 37. And again, if he happens to have a few fastest laps to neglect the place differential spots he lost, I would think it's possible. But I also feel pretty good that if he does finish where he's starting, that I think it's almost definite that he'll be in the optimal.
Hold on a minute. So if he's finishing 4th and he finishes 6th, he gets 36 points.
So if he finishes 6th, he gets 36.
Yeah, and in every spot that he goes from beyond there is 2 points. So it would be 36, 34, 32 points for 8th.
Yeah, so I think
Like 6 would be the bare bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, he'd have to place differential drivers would have to have some issues. But I do think in 4th, you said 4th was 38 points?
4th is 40.
Yeah, so a 40 score with a 7,500 price tag should be good enough to get him.
And I think the other key point too is, can he steal a couple Dominator points?
That's just it too. Something happens where he ends up leading a few laps, gets to the front. So yeah, ultimately that's in it too. But no, consider me and I'm not a big fan of McDowell today, but I could see reason to play him today. And then obviously you talked on a bunch of place differential guys, but yeah, Gilliland's going to be popular. Jensen Button, you said that you do like him today.
Oh yeah.
So as I look at some of his peripherals, yeah, I mean it's not great, but it's not terrible, especially when you talk about his
like
price.
he's better driver than what the car is. Like he's going to make the car better. Like if he was in like a car like a Kobayashi or a Bristecki or an SVG, like he would do very good too.
And he's going to be, just so you're quick, he is going to be unowned.
Yeah.
People aren't going to pay that price for him from the back. All right, so let's move over to last but not least, your fades. Seen a lot of big names in this list, so walk me through who makes sense to start exiting off your player pools.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take a shot and not play, Suarez, Gibbs, and McDowell because I think they're going to be racing for points. I think they could stay up there and hold their positions. I just don't think, from a DFS perspective, they're going to have the upside that's what's needed because of all the place differential plays that are out there. I touched earlier on Larson, Bush, Bell, Marty Truex. Like I just think their price is too much. Because I don't think they're going to be able to beat Reddick and get the Dominator points that they need. Corey LaJoie is starting way too far forward. Bubba Wallace, I think he's going to end up point racing again. And at the beginning, I didn't mind him because I think he's traditionally horrible on these road courses. I just think he's going to be so low owned. But I don't think I can see him finishing around the top 10, which is what I would need from him. From a point perspective, from a price perspective, he's not, expensive this week. Keselowski's another driver I'm not going to take a chance on. And then the drivers starting in the back, Rockenfeller, Bilecki, Lally, Priest, Amarola. It's either the equipment or they just don't run well on road courses.
Bubba Wallace, cheapest price he's been all year. But yes, tough to click his name on these tracks. It just seems like even when the tracks he's supposed to do good on, he hasn't been. And track like this, it's blah. I know in the Cookout a few weeks ago, he had a decent score. Led a ton of laps. That was the reason why. It looks like he's been trying to make more pushes towards the front. I think he's led more laps in the last 2 races than he has all season long. So maybe it's a push from them to try to get to the front, which could be your thing on points. But yeah, I think he's just tough to play. I know that he's not going to be owned, and I know that the price makes a ton of sense. But yeah, it'd be tough to fathom this dude navigating his way towards the front. Well, at the end of the race is what I mean. I mean, granted, you could have a strategy where you get to the front early and lose, long-term track position. But I think he's interesting, and I'm always a Bubba guy in terms of trying to find ways to play him because I do think he's had just an unfortunate season. I think he's been driving really well, just making random mistakes. Interestingly enough, you said Kyle Busch, Chris Bell, Larson, right? These are guys you don't feel any confidence in today?
I think they do well. I think they stay up there. I just don't think they get the Dominator points needed to pay off their salary. And I think there's too many place differential upside drivers.
And that's fair. And we barely spoke on Chase Elliott. He's usually good on these tracks, but he's just kind of in this weird pattern where people are going to find it hard to play him today. He's going to be on the lower ownership end of things. Elliott, I don't see him here as a fade for you. So you higher on him?
No,
it looks like he's only going to be
no,
about 15%.
I would think he's higher earned than that, just because of his name. But I could see the reasoning why you want to play him. I just don't think he can compete with Reddick.
Yeah, and that's totally fair there. Okay, so let's wrap up the show. Maybe some final notes. Anything you want to add in terms of this track and how to build lineups? I know the race starts in about.
Yeah, just don't be different. I mean, don't be afraid to be different today. But again, I don't think you want to get too sneaky either. I think Logano, Blaney, Austin Dillon are very good pivots for you. Stenhouse could be too, depending upon how you're taking him as a pivot. But just be careful. Don't eat all that chalk. You're going to need at least one pivot somewhere.
Oh, good advice. Good advice. All right, folks. Another good one. Just real quick before we end the show, I'll just look if I missed any questions. Quick, Coop. Kyle Martin. Thoughts on Ryan Preece? I know we spoke on him briefly, but any crazy thoughts? Fade?
I'm not playing him.
As far as who wins today, Linder, look, we'll try to give you. I'll have Coop give you maybe some guys he finds valuable for their price. I know Coop's big on Reddick, but that price is like $330, which is actually kind of crazy for a race. Who do you think wins this race, Coop?
Tyler Reddick.
Reddick, and the odds are kind of crazy, right? So it's not like a total crazy take in that regard. Jake saying Chris Bell goes to victory lane. Definitely a hot take. So definitely a hot take.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, wouldn't be crazy, but definitely a hot take. Harrison Burton, Coop, thoughts?
It's not his type of race. So if he was starting farther back, but 24th is too far up, I do think, if you have enough conviction to play him, he is going to be one of the lower end drivers on the slate.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, guys. Thank you again for another fun time talking NASCAR. Coop, thanks for all the information. And of course, guys, you build your lineups, head over to runpuresports.com. Code NFL23, get yourself 23% off any and all lifetime packages. You will be grandfathered in, as the cool kids say. Also, go ahead and like this video. It's not hard. We're here on a Sunday talking NASCAR. So would appreciate at least a like, and always appreciate all you guys commented in the chat. We did get to all your questions and potential concerns. So kudos to Coop there for answering all that stuff. But yes, look, without further ado, gamble responsibly, stay safe. And as always, run pure. We'll see you guys next week.